Today we're starting our summer 2023 challenge with C major. Welcome back. Welcome to the studio. My name is Cassie and I'm a professional violist and teaching artist. So today's really exciting because we're going to kick off our summer 2023 practice challenge. And I had this idea because when I was an undergrad, my teacher over every break would give us a bunch of etudes and scales or maybe even new pieces to practice. So I thought this would be a really great way for all of us, including myself, to stay motivated to practice over the summer. So each week we're going to do a different key that we're going to do a scale with that, arpeggios, an etude in that key, or an etude that develops something in the piece that we'll be working on, and then we'll do a piece. The pieces are going to range in difficulty. Some of them are a little bit more advanced, some of them are a little bit easier, and then same idea with the etude. So hopefully there's something for everybody in these videos. So let's get started. We're going to kick off this video with a C major scale. And if you want all of this music, it's going to be on my Patreon page. There's a link in the description below to join our community there. And the same thing goes for all the etudes and the pieces. You'll have my manuscript or my pieces, my parts in Patreon. So check that out if you're interested. So we're going to start off with the C major scale. And we're going to do 2 beats per bow. I'm going to set my metronome at 60. And we're going to transition our rhythms. So starting off with 2 beats per bow. And then we're going to do quarter notes, slurred 2 per bow. Eighth notes, slurred 4 per bow. And then we're going to do a major arpeggio and a minor arpeggio. And I'll call out those notes before we get there. So I'm going to set my metronome to 60. And I'm going to use this as my offbeat. We're also going to be talking about a few different ways to practice this. So instead of using my metronome as the onbeat, for this one we're going to use it as the offbeat. So the hardest part is the count when we start. So I'm going to demonstrate a few times and then we'll do it together. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm waiting for the click, and that's in my brain, that's the and. So I'm thinking, and 1, 2, 3, 4 to get started. So let's try that together, and we're starting with 2 beats per bow. 1, 2, 3, 4. might be a really good time to stop the video and continue to practice the scale if you think that you need it or if you'd like some additional practice on that. But if you're ready to move on, we're going to go on to our Etude. This is from the Kayser, K-A-Y-S-E-R, Kayser Etude book, and this is Etude number 9, and we're going to be working on some faster bows, some broken thirds, and some spiccato with this one. And this is all leading up to working on one of the movements from the third Bach Cello Suite. So with our Etude, we're going to practice this one a few different ways before we do an actual playthrough of it, and I'm not going to play through the whole Etude. The purpose of an Etude, it's the French word for study, so we're just studying one piece of technique. So for this one, I'm going to start at measure 13, and before I worry about the spiccato or the bouncing bow, we're going to play it on the string a little bit more slowly so we can get the notes. So I mentioned that there's some broken thirds in this. That just means that we're playing a note going up a third. So if I'm on C, we're going to count that as 1, C, D, E. E is the third above C. We're going to go back a note to D and then go up a third again. So it's C, E, D, F, and it's going to continue that way for a lot of this Etude. So we're going to look at measure 13, and I'm not even going to set a metronome. We're just going to play it slowly and just a little bit of it. We're not going to do the whole page. So let's start on the C string. E, D, F. Reach for that 4. This measure's the same. Leave your 1 down. So again, you're going to be maybe stopping the video a lot to practice these individually. I've already practiced this Etude in preparation for this video. So the little section that we're going to do has a version in C major, and then later on a version in C minor, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But for right now, that's step 1. So maybe pause the video, practice through from measure 13 through measure 33, because that's the chunk that we're going to work on. And then when you're ready, come back and we'll talk about the next section. If you're ready to move on, the next section is different ways to practice this. So instead of just playing straight 16th notes, we're going to do a bit of odd, even, as I call it, rhythms. So really what I'm doing is changing the first note to a dotted note, and the second note becomes a 32nd, essentially, because we have 16ths. So it will sound like this. It's like long, short. I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the most important thing is after that long note, I'm going to set the coming finger. I'm not going to wait. So that looks like this. Set 2, set 3, set 4, set 1. Now notice I'm not waiting to set, so it's not set. It's as soon as your bow stops on that longer note, you're going to set the coming finger. So we are going to play from 13 to 33 eventually, but right now I want us to just do starting from 13 and then going to the end of the next line using this rhythmic pattern. So let's try it. 1, 2, ready, go. Set, 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 set. Stay in the lower half. Set, set, set. Stay in the lower half. Good. So that's step 1. Again, you might need to pause the video and practice that a little bit more, and that's totally fine. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to flip that rhythm around. So we were doing long, short, long. We're going to flip it around to be short, long, which sounds like this. Set, 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 set. So let's try that together. 1, 2, ready, go. Set 1, set 2, set 3, open. 1, 2, 3. Stay in the lower half. Set, 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 set. Etc. Now, the one really important thing is when you're practicing anything new, you shouldn't go play through the whole piece because you're going to get frustrated. There's going to be a bunch of stuff you're going to want to go back and fix, and you're going to forget what it is by the time you get to the end of the page. So that's why we're doing small little chunks. So I'm going to assume that you're going to stop the video again and practice those 2 rhythms on their own. There's a bunch of other ways we can practice, especially like strings of 16th notes, but for right now we're going to go to the metronome, which I'm setting at 120, and every click is a 16th note, so it will sound like this. So we're still quite under tempo, but let's try that. We're going to go from 13 to 33, so if you need a chance to look at that before we do that, stop the video. 1, 2, ready, go. Stay in the lower half, just below the middle. Selected this particular excerpt is because it goes through 2 different hand patterns. We've got the C major pattern, and then we kind of transitioned into C minor, which becomes E flat because those 2 are related. So we get 2 different hand patterns to practice. If you want to go and practice the rest of this etude, by all means, that's totally up to you, but we're just going to work on this one little excerpt. So we've done it at a slow tempo. We've done it all separate bows. Another way to practice this is by doing slurs. So when you have separate bows, you can kind of trick your brain or your left hand by practicing it with slurs. So I'm going to set the same metronome tempo, and we're just going to do a little excerpt of this. So I'm going to do 4 measures, starting again at 13, but I'm going to slur 4 notes per bow. So it will look like this. You want to be really articulate with your left hand, so plop from your base knuckle, which is your lowest knuckle here. So we want to see this kind of action when you're plopping, to be very accurate with the rhythm. So let's try that together, just 4 measures of this. 1, 2, 4 bows slurred. Obviously continue that if you want to. You can do different slurs, so you could do like 2 notes per bow, you could do 8 notes per bow, but the only other one I want to do together is on offbeat slur. So I'm going to do the first note separate, but then everything after that is 2 notes slurred. So it will look like this: down, up, down, up, down. So we're kind of slurring across what our normal beat pattern would be. So let's try that with the metronome. And remember, it's just 1 separate, and then everything else after that is 2 slurred. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. different ways to practice when you've got strings of 16th notes. And again, this is an etude, so the point of this is that when you encounter strings of 16th notes in your literature, whether that be solo stuff, orchestral stuff, chamber stuff, you're going to have some practice strategies to kind of tackle those passages. So now that we've done all of our practice methods, I'm going to increase the metronome to 140, and we're going to try doing 2 notes per bow. I'm sorry, 2 notes per click. So it will be... So obviously this is performance tempo. If you're not ready for this quick tempo, by all means practice slowly, but this is what we're aiming for. And we are going to do the whole passage. We're going to do from measure 13 to measure 33 at this quick tempo. I'll count to 4 and then we'll begin. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully you're still with me. Hopefully you didn't lose any fingers along the way. There's obviously a million things that we haven't talked about in this etude, one of those being spiccato, and the other thing being the shift to second position. So I'm just going to briefly touch on those. If you want a more extensive video on spiccato, I did make one and I'll link that below or above. I never know where it appears on the screen. And then if you want a more extensive video on shifting, I will also link that. So spiccato, that's that bouncy stroke. I'm not staying on the string. My bow's going to bounce a little bit. So depending on the speed that we're going, depending on the passage that we're exploring, you might be a little bit higher in the bow, and everybody's bow is balanced a little bit differently. So one quick way to find out how your bow, where your bow's balance point is to use your finger as kind of a fulcrum and to find where your bow balances. So it should balance perfectly without falling on your finger. And right near there, that's your bow's bounce point. So you're going to aim for that. So let's just on the open D string, do a quick practice of that. I'm going to be setting my bow on the string at that bounce point, or where as close as I can find to where the balance point was. And I'm going to lift above maybe an inch, and I'm going to drop down. I'm going to try to find that same spot again. Drop down. Most important thing is that my pinky stays curved and my thumb stays curved. If your fingers look like this stroke will not work. So they have to stay nice and curvy. So the next step to that is to add an up bow. So we did the down drop. We're going to let it rebound up this time. So I'm going to drop down and let it rebound up. Now basically the bow does the work for us in this stroke, and your arm is involved a little bit too. But again, check out that spiccato tutorial. The next step, again, would be just to do more of the down up. So instead of doing 1, we'll do 2. Instead of doing 2, we'll do 3, etc. So once that stroke starts to feel comfortable, then you can kind of work on incorporating it into the piece. I wouldn't recommend trying to learn spiccato at the same time you're trying to learn this etude. Keep them separate, and once the spiccato stroke feels comfortable, then you can try to integrate it into the piece. The last thing is there's a shift to second position in measure 20 that we didn't talk about. So my fingering for that measure, measure 20, is I'm going to start in first position. Then I'm going to shift here to second position. So my 2 is going to go where my 3 usually is. And the way to practice that is playing 1 and then shifting with my 1 to where my 2 was. So my 1 is now on C, whereas before my 2 was on C. So I'll show you that up close. And then I'm going to plot my 2 for D, and then I'm going to stay in third position for the rest of that measure. So I'm starting 20 in first. I've shifted to second position. This is a 2, 1, reach for high 3, 2, low 4, 3, 1, and then I'm going to shift just a half step back to first position. So my first finger is going to go from where my 2 usually is to where my 1 is. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not doing that with just my finger or just my wrist. My whole arm is going to always be involved in that shift. So again, if you need a refresher or you're new to shifting, just check out the tutorial on that below. All right, I think we've covered all the important topics I wanted to cover in the etude. And if you haven't figured out by now, I do put timestamps in the comments below. So if you didn't want to do the etude or you didn't want to do the scales, you can check out the timestamps to skip to whatever part you're interested in. So we're going to move on to our solo piece, which happens to be the Gigue from the third Bach Cello Suite. So the third suite is in C major. And the reason that I chose the Gigue is because I think there's a lot of really great things to work on in there. Some of the stuff that we had from our etude, and then a lot of stuff that we had from our scales, because a lot of music is scales, right? So for this one, our time signature is 3/8, and that literally means we just have 3/8 notes worth of beats for every measure. So my counting in my head is 1, 2, 3, new measure, 1, 2, 3. And our smallest division of the beat here is a 16th note. So again, I'm going to subdivide or break those big beats into smaller pieces in my head and think 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 for the 16th notes. So we're going to play through this very, very slowly, and I'm going to be talking over while I'm playing. So again, you might need to stop the video, make some notes in your part, and then resume again. And that's really what these videos are designed to be. It's not meant to be play through everything all at once. It's just like a primer, I guess, for things that you could practice this week. Next week, we're moving on to a different scale, a different key center. So this is kind of this week's work. So right from the beginning, I have an 8th note pickup, which is going to be an up bow. I'll say 95% of our pickups in Baroque music are up bows. So I'm going to count 1, 2, and begin on beat 3. Same shift to second position here. Stay in second. Back to first position. That's the end of our first phrase. We've got another pickup. The end of our phrase, new phrase. At measure 21, and there's a very tricky bowing here that we're not going to practice as printed to begin with. We're going to practice this as double stops. So the notes that are slurred will be played together. So the C, D, instead of playing, is now played together. And we're going to continue that for this whole entire section of its bariolage between two different strings. So starting in 21, we're going to play double stops, 3 and open, 2, 1. Things that I see students do is that their fingers are not going down on the tips, they're going down on the flats, so they're hitting the D string. So if that's the case for you, when you look down the barrel of the fingerboard, you should be able to see your first knuckle pretty clearly. So you want to see this, not this. And an easy fix for that is instead of your elbow being kind of out towards your back, you're going to swing it underneath the instrument to ensure that you go down on your fingertips. I just left off 22, 23, 24, measure 25, so we're going to start there. That's where we're no longer playing open D, we're playing open G as our double stop. Shift to third position. Series of double stops. Now the thing to watch out for here is I don't want to hear so much the D, which is kind of like our drone note. Think of like a bagpipe that always has that one tone that sustains. I want to hear more of the A string notes. So I have to make sure that my bow is balanced so that I'm not hitting just the D string, which would sound like this. I can barely hear those melody notes. So I want to make sure that my split is kind of 60% on the A string, 40% on the D string, which would sound like this. So I want to hear more of that melody note. And another way to practice that is by just leaving that D off. Add it back in when you want to. To measure 41, which is another new pattern here. Bach is all about patterns and sequences and totally inventive ways to use arpeggios and scales. So starting in 41, we've got 3 notes slurred, or 2 beats, and we want to make sure I don't use the whole bow because then I get trapped at the tip. So I'm going to think in my head, save, spend, save, spend. And I want to be right in the middle of the bow for this next passage because it's a bunch of 16th notes. So not tip, not frog, but right in the middle. Now I've got a long slur that's going to bring me to the tip. Stay at the tip. Back to the middle. Middle. And that finishes the first half of this movement. So lots of things obviously in there that I didn't discuss that, you're going to be learning Bach for the rest of your life. Every time I come back to Bach, it's a different way of playing it, a different way of hearing it. So these are just some things to consider as you personally delve into it. If there's anything I didn't cover, which there's a ton I didn't, but as you're working through this piece, if you have questions, post it in the comments below because I really do enjoy trying to help people from afar. And I'm always happy to make a video talking about any specific issues that come up in this piece. So there's one thing I want to review in that first half, which was the section that we did as double stops at 21. I want to talk about things that are going to happen when you do it not as double stops. So your bow can kind of forget which direction it's supposed to be going. So I, in my own part, labeled the first bow of every measure. So I labeled down, up, down, just to help keep me on track. Now, the other thing you want to watch out for is that your elbow, your bow elbow, doesn't start becoming too active. You want to make sure that you're crossing as far on the D string side of the G and as close as the G string side of the D. I know that makes no sense, but just aim for the middle of these 2 strings. Like imagine that there's a 3rd string in the middle there. I don't want to see this. I'm going from the extremes of the string. I want to try to stay in the middle of the string. And if sometimes you let a little double stop in there, that's okay because that means that your arm, your elbow is not working too hard to bring you from string to string. We're going to see a similar passage in the second half at measure 81. So when that comes up, just know that you have a few practice techniques to be prepared for. So what we did was we did double stops, which is really great for working on the intonation. And then it's also really great for getting your arm kind of on both string levels, not going too far in between each of those. Hello again from the future. My camera died while I was recording the second half of this, so we're just going to resume where we left off. So this is the second half of the Bach. And here we've got a bunch of 16th notes that we're starting out with. Now I could just play these as if they were all the same volume. I think it's nice to add a little bit of interest to those notes, so I'm going to play more, less, more, less. That's also highlighting the descending scale that we're playing. B, A, G, F, E, D, C. So it helps kind of fill in that melodic line. So we're going to start at the pick up to 49 and think of that more or less on these 16th notes. To the frog, lift your bow elbow and then drop your bow elbow all the way to the tip for this. Stay in the upper half. Same idea here. More, less, more, less, more, less. That's the end of our phrase. Louder on the lower parts here. Third position, just for those 2 notes. First position. Lighter. Heavier. So So in Bach, we are our own accompanist and our own melodic person. So here, we've got two contrasting lines. We've got a slightly higher line and a lower line. So to highlight the difference in the timbres or the registers there, we're going to be lighter on the A string, heavier on the lower, on the G string and C string. Third position again, light, heavy. Continuing on. Third position. Little breath here. And then come away to end that phrase. Now I've got a couple double stops coming up here. So I'm going to set my 2 on the A string for this next note. And then plop my 3 right next door on the D string to get that tritone interval or augmented fourth interval. I'm going to leave my 2 down, set that 2 and then find 3, slide 3 up. Now here's a sequence, and Bach is all about sequences, arpeggios, and scales. So a sequence is kind of the same thing, just done a slightly different way. So this first measure, measure 74-76 here. We're slurring 3, separating 3, same thing. Same. And then the pattern breaks here. Now the measure we just got to, 81, is the exact same thing that we saw in the first half at measure 21. So we're going to practice these as double stops again. So set your 2 on the D string. Now double stop with open A. And instead of doing it as double stops, we're going to do it as separate notes as printed. Again, it's okay here if it's a slight double stop, because that means your elbow's not going too crazy in this string crossing. So let's start right at 81. Bring out the changing notes. Measure 33, we want to make sure that we're playing more on the melodic string on the D string than on the drone note on the open G. Shift. Another sequence here. So that brings us to the end of our Bach movement. There's a lot of things that happen in the first half that again happen in the second half in a different key or in a similar fashion. So we talked about the bariolage or the crossing between strings that we have at 21 and also 81. So it's a similar way to practice those passages. So now that we've worked through some of the bits, you might want to pause the video so that you can keep annotating in your score. But we're going to do a playthrough with no repeat of either half. So it's just a straight playthrough. Under tempo, and then we'll go a little bit faster at tempo. I'll count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and we'll begin. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. our slow playthrough, we're going to do our at tempo playthrough, and I'm going to set my metronome for this one. I'm aiming for dotted quarter note, so the whole measure equals 60. So I'll count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and we'll begin, and again, no repeats on this one. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Great job making it this far. I know it's been a really long video, but I hope that you'll kind of pause, come back to little bits of this throughout the week, and then it'll help keep you motivated during the summer, because I know it's really hard when there's no pressing deadlines to practice for. You might lose motivation really easily, like I have in past summers. There's a million things that I didn't cover in the scales, in the etude, and in the Bach. So again, if you have any questions or there's concerns or things that I didn't cover that you'd like me to talk about, please post that in the comments below. If you want all of my music with my bowings, my fingerings, check out our community on Patreon. And the next video, we're going to be exploring a different key center, a different etude, and a different solo piece. So I'll see you on that one. Happy practicing.